Hello. Hello there. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Live from New York, it's Tuesday night with the Linnaean Society. My name is Ken Chea. I'm the president of the Linnaean Society of New York, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. Well, spring is here. I mean, it's really here this week. Migration season is on. The trees are lit up with leaves and flowers, and there are birds everywhere. Over 70 people showed up this morning to attend the Central Park Tuesday morning Linnaean bird walk. Now, last Tuesday, we saw 99 species in Central Park. Today, we may have broken 100. I don't know. I'm still waiting for the final tally. Mother Nature is bringing it out. Yeah, migration. This is the season I wait all year for. I hope you do too. And I hope that you are making the time to get out and enjoy it. Now, let me just check something here. According to my participants list, we have 84 people on right now and more joining by the minute. So once again, a very warm welcome to everyone. Sit back and we hope you will enjoy our program tonight. Tonight marks our 9th speaker meeting taking place live and online. It's our final meeting of the 2020-21 season. I would like to personally thank the people who have made this happen this year. My sincere thanks go to our treasurer, Ruth Hart, who personally sets up all of our Zoom meetings and rehearsals with our speaker. Webmaster Bruce Yolton, who makes sure our website is updated and where you can find all of our speaker information and that all of our technical details and functionality is in order. Our past president, Rochelle Thomas, and current vice president, Gabriel Willow, who both bring their excellent MC skills to our Q&A segment with our speakers following each program. Our recording secretary, Amy Simmons, who, as you should know by now, keeps the most meticulous and informative meeting minutes of anybody I've ever seen. She does this with every speaker meeting as well as our council meetings, and where would we be without Amy? Finally, my sincere thanks to all the council members who devote their ideas, their time, and their energy to the successful running of the society. They are an awesome team to be a part of. And we all look forward to seeing you and resuming our meetings in September. For tonight's program, as usual, we have disabled the Zoom chat feature as well as the video and microphone. The Zoom Q&A feature, not to be confused with the chat feature, Q&A is fully functional. You could type a question in there right now, and it will be used during tonight's program. That feature is at the bottom of your screen. And if you send us any questions that you may have for tonight's speaker, following the presentation, our Vice President, Gabriel Willow, will take time to select a few of those questions to present. Now I have 4 business items to announce this evening. The most recent results of our members voting, a quick update on the Great Gull Island Birdathon, how to become a Linnaean member, and an update on the Society's plans to incorporate and the upcoming membership vote that will determine the future legal status of the Linnaean Society of New York. We'll begin with item 1, the recent voting of our members. With 118 votes of approval and 0 votes of opposition for motion 1, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the following 9 applicants as new members of the Society. Elizabeth Tylowski, sponsored by Kate McMullen. Edmund Berry, sponsored by Barbara Saunders. Jill Hoskins, sponsored by Miriam Rakowski. Anne Via McCullough, sponsored by Ken Chea. Carrie C. Russell, sponsored by Chuck McAlexander. Margaret Bradley, sponsored by Ellen Rockmuller. Anna Gomez-Taylor, sponsored by Rochelle Thomas. Patrick Smith, sponsored by Ann Lazarus. And Kevin Rolwing, sponsored by Gabriel Willow. So Elizabeth, Edmund, Jill, Anna, Carrie, Margaret, Anna, Patrick, and Kevin, if any of you are out there right now, this applause is for you. Congratulations to all and welcome to the Linnaean Society of New York. Motion 2 to accept the April 2021 meeting minutes also passed unanimously by a vote of 116 to 0. So that's more good news. And once again, I thank all members out there for voting. Item number 2. Now, I bet there's someone out there right now who's wondering, how do I become a Linnaean Society member? Well, listen, it's really easy. Just go to our website, linnaeannewyork.org. That's LINNAEANNEWYORK.org, linnaeannewyork.org, and you'll find all the information you need. Now, in case you need a sponsor and you don't know that many Linnaean members yet, don't worry about a thing. We're a very friendly group. And our sponsorship requirement is really more of a traditional formality and a lot less daunting than it may seem. It's nothing like your high school cafeteria. In fact, if you need a sponsor, you may contact me at president@linnaeannewyork.org, and I'll be happy to sponsor you. In addition, you may contact any of the other officers of the Society about sponsorship, the vice president, secretary, treasurer, editor. All of their email addresses are also at the bottom of our homepage under contacts. So you see, you're not just stuck with me. You have choices here. Just scroll down to the bottom and select any of those emails and talk to us about sponsorship, or if you need more information, please let us know. And please remember, any society or organization is only as healthy as its growing and diverse membership. We welcome to become members of the Linnaean Society of New York, regardless of race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, background, geographic location, and regardless of whether you use the Sibley or Peterson guides. We don't care which bird guide you use. We would love to hear from you and to welcome you to our community of birders and naturalists. Item number 3, the Great Gull Island Birdathon was held this past weekend. This is an annual event that raises much needed funds for the research and conservation effort of the largest nesting common tern colony in the world and the largest nesting roseate tern colony in the Northern Hemisphere. This effort has been led by Helen Hayes of the American Museum of Natural History for the past 50 years. And Helen and her staff and their terns could always use your support. While we're still awaiting the results of the Birdathon, I'd like to mention 2 shout-outs. The team known as the Noble Gnatcatchers, which include Janet Wooten, Dawn Hannay, Kevin Cisco, and Liam Brock, recorded 105 species in Central Park and Jamaica Bay this weekend. Nice work, Noble Gnatcatchers. Excellent work. And another big shout out to Arthur A., who counted 22 species near Keachie, Vermont. Arthur is 6 years old. I don't think I knew 22 species of birds at 6 years old. Arthur, way to go, fella. Excellent. Here you go. Put some skin on it. That is just so cool. Please know, everyone, that you can make a donation anytime at all to Great Gull Island simply by visiting our website, and you will find that under news and resources, I believe. The Great Gull Island project has been going for 50 years. We want it to go for another 50, and we could always use your support. And that is my Linnaean 2021 Great Gull Island Birdathon report for this evening. Finally, item number 4. I have some important news to share. Last week at our monthly council meeting, the council and officers voted unanimously to incorporate and to accept the bylaws of the new corporation with one very minor amendment. This is great news because it means that in the next month, you, the members, will have your turn to vote on incorporating and accepting the new bylaws of the society. The complex process of incorporating the society from a non-for-profit association to a non-for-profit corporation has been proceeding within the council for the past several months. Now, at last, we're poised to bring the society into the 21st century as a legal corporation. And of course, it's up to you as members to accept this change in the organizational structure. Let me assure everyone out there that the society as you know it, with its field trips, its meetings, will go on just as it always has. You'll probably not notice any changes at all in how we conduct our general business. But if you want to continue to enjoy the things that we bring you, if you want to see 99 species of birds in Central Park on a May morning, or if you want to enjoy the programs that we bring, like the one you're about to see in a few moments, then I ask for you to support the work of the council and its officers by voting yes to incorporate. This is an important change and a necessary one. We will need a 3/4 majority vote for those who respond to make any changes in our current constitution. We can't do this without your support, but we can't continue to operate in the 21st century with the legal framework that was established in the 19th century. The world has changed a bit since then, and so too must the society. So please look for my forthcoming president's letter, which will outline this process. And when the time comes to vote, please vote later this summer to support incorporation of the society. And now for tonight's feature presentation. An amazing thing happened to me one night this past winter. I was in Central Park looking for a snowy owl, and I saw a coyote on the North Meadow ball fields of Central Park. It was trotting along in the snow, and then with an effortless leap, it just sailed over a tall fence as if it were nothing. A couple of months later, on a Linnaean Tuesday morning bird walk, I saw another coyote hiding in the upper lobe of the lake. Just recently, I spotted another coyote resting in dense brush in the north woods of Central Park. What in the heck is going on in Central Park with coyotes all of a sudden? Well, tonight's speaker, Roland Kays, may have some answers to that question. The eastern coyote is actually a coyote-wolf mix that has expanded its range in eastern North America over the last few decades. Having taken over the wildlands, this big predator is increasingly observed in urban areas, including New York City. How easily do these animals adapt to urban landscapes, and how will people's relationships to coyotes change in the future? Dr. Roland Kays is head of the Biodiversity Research Lab in the North Carolina Museum of Natural Science, and he is a professor in the Fisheries, Wildlife and Conservation program at North Carolina State University. Dr. Kays is broadly trained in mammal ecology, evolution, and conservation, and has published on sloth sheep, Canis soupus, frugivorous carnivores, arboreal fishers, and incognito, olinguitos. It is my great pleasure to present Dr. Roland Kays, and Eastern coyotes, part wolf, part dog, extremely adaptable and close. Dr. Kays, please.
Great, thanks, Ken. You did pretty good with that tongue twister I gave you there. I'm impressed.
I was practicing all afternoon.
Right. All right. Well, let me fire this sucker up here. Right. Yeah. So thanks for having me, everybody. It's my pleasure to come and talk to you about coyotes. And I'm actually going to start kind of where Ken left off with the fact that many of you may have seen coyotes. It sounds like Ken has seen more coyotes in Central Park than I've seen in North Carolina in the last 10 years, which is pretty incredible. And these are some pictures from Bruce that I just pulled from his website, which is listed there. And indeed, coyotes are increasingly close to all of us, really, no matter where you live in the United States. And you can see them as Bruce has captured them here, sneaking through the park at night. I like this one in particular because it's got to be the only picture I've seen where the coyote is actually the background and not the sort of feature of the photograph here for a flycatcher. But it's a good transition because what I want to really start with is sort of the background of coyotes and start from sort of square one with what are coyotes, where do they come from? Because I think that will end up informing us by the end of the talk on what we might do to live with them better in our present situation. So I want to start by going kind of back in time, right? Let's travel back before humans were here, before New York was what it is today. North America was a megafauna haven, right? There were mastodons, there were mammoths, there were giant ground sloths, there were all kinds of amazing animals not really that long ago, right? If you think about sort of 10, 12,000 years ago, there was a completely different, some of the same animals were here, raccoons were still here, right? But there were all these other animals, all these giant megafauna that were here. And during this time, we had coyotes, but they didn't live in New York. This is where they lived. This is the record of where we had fossil records of coyotes. And you can see it's basically the prairies and deserts, right? It's not the forests. They're out there in the western United States. They're not in the great northern forest. They're not down in the tropical rainforest. They're not in the great eastern forest. And they were really a mesopredator, right? When you think about all these large megafauna that were out there, not to mention all the large predators that were out there, right? We had on this lineup you see here, you see the saber-toothed cat, the short-faced bear, these giant predators that we had in North America. That creature over there on the right, the small one, that's a direwolf, right? So direwolves are bigger than gray wolves. So there was this giant lineup. Coyotes were small to medium, right? They were definitely a mesopredator, and this is going to become important again when I come back. I'm going to come back to this point at the end of the talk. But as those other species went extinct, coyotes became really the survivor, right? And the other survivor was the wolf, the gray wolf that's still here. Basically, them and the cougars were the two biggest predators to survive the Pleistocene extinction that wiped out all those other large things. And then in the midst of this, the sort of the third character of our story today is the dog, because the dog moved in, initially with the first American settlers that came over the Bering Land Bridge 10, 12,000 years ago, and then later with the rest of the immigrants that came across on boats from Europe, right? And this time period really brought, obviously, massive changes to our environment. And when we're talking about coyotes and wolves, there was a really big persecution of predators, right? They just really wanted to wipe them out. They didn't want to live with them. They had no interest. They were completely the devil. They wanted to kill them all. They were afraid for their own lives, but they were especially afraid for their livestock. They had livestock roaming everywhere. They weren't fenced in, kept in barns, sort of tended as carefully as we do today. They were basically left to roam around. And there's a really amazing story of a particular incident, which I think was typical of the time, which is called the Great Hinckley Hunt. And this is from Ohio in 1813. So this is when Ohio was really the frontier. And this was on Christmas Day. And they decided as a community, the people that lived there, that they wanted to wipe out not just the predators, but basically everything from this patch of forest so they could let their livestock just roam around. And so on Christmas Day, they formed a giant circle. This is called a circle hunt. They formed a giant circle and they drove all the animals to the middle. So they had men and boys and guns and dogs and bells and whistles, and they drove everything to the middle. And it culminated at this frozen river that you can see here, where they shot everything, right? So this was their solution to wipe out all the wildlife, especially the predators. The predators were enemy number one, so that they could let their sheep wander around without any competition, without any predators. And you can see, if you look carefully in this, you might see some men sort of climbing up in the trees so they can shoot down so they don't hit, one of their buddies across the way. And they were quite proud that they didn't do that. And at the bottom of this illustration comes from 1890. So this illustration is already looking at this as ancient history, right? This is a long time ago. It says a lively rattle of musketry took place. And so you can imagine the scene here. And this is really the attitude, not just towards wolves, but towards wildlife in general. But the result was we pretty much wiped out the wolves from the lower 48, right? We drove them out so that by 1960, there were a handful of wolves holding on just barely up in northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota. There were a few red wolves, perhaps down in Louisiana. We can talk about those maybe later. Now, wolves still survived in Canada and Alaska and other parts of Europe and Asia, but this is this situation in 1890 or in 1960. Sorry, that basically the mid 1900s. And during this time, you can imagine in Minnesota, in this area, the wolves were still there, but there weren't very many of them, and they were under a lot of persecution. And in fact, something we think very special happened around this time that actually has quite a lot to do with the coyotes that are in Central Park right now. And I'm gonna embellish a little bit, but basically there was a female wolf and she was in the forest, and it was, early springtime, wintertime, basically coming into heat, and there were no other wolves around because they'd all been shot. But at that time and place, there were a fair amount of coyotes around. And so basically what we can infer is that she took the next best thing she could get, and she hybridized and bred with the coyote. And so when you have two species that hybridize, often it doesn't work out at all, right? But with wolves and coyotes, they're similar enough that they can produce offspring. And so you get, just like you are the offspring of your mother and your father, and you have half the genes from each, you have an offspring, the F1 hybrid, that's half wolf and half coyote. So what's going to happen to this animal? This animal can still breed. In this case, we know that some of these animals bred back with another wolf and back with another wolf, and so on until what we see today. This is real data here. I call it a gene scan. This is one animal. All the little rows that are out that are there in the y-axis, that's a chromosome, and they're colored by rather the genes originated from coyote or wolf. And so this is kind of a typical Great Lakes, Minnesota wolf from today that is mostly wolf, but still has a little coyote left over from that hybridization effect. And we've done a number of different animals with this type of scan, and we can see the evidence of this, and we can date it. We can get an estimate of how long ago it happened. And so this shows you that wolves and coyotes can breed, and that can propagate itself onto future generations. But it wasn't, some of these animals went the other way, right? There were coyotes running around there too, and those animals crossed into the coyotes, and then they became a little bit more coyote until you had an animal that was mostly coyote, but had a little bit of wolf. And this was happening right around the time that coyotes were first moving east. So this map is showing you a color-coded map of how coyotes colonized the East Coast, with each shade of color showing another decade as they moved eastward. And you can see I've got these ones up in Minnesota with a little bit of green in that circle, indicating they have a little bit of wolf in there. And they moved much quicker. If you look at that pacing into upstate New York, Whereas the other animals were moving quite a bit slower, about 5 times slower, the ones that didn't have the wolf genes in. So it seems like the wolf genes actually helped them colonize faster than the coyotes that didn't have wolf genes. And then there was another of these events. And again, we know this from genetics. I'm going to embellish a little bit, but imagine the first coyote with a little bit of wolf genes crosses the St. Lawrence River. That's a big barrier. We don't know that it happened there for sure, but let's just say it's there, right? Lots of, the St. Lawrence River is big, right? It freezes over sometimes, but then the icebreakers come through. So it's going to be a sketchy crossing. But imagine she makes it into upstate New York and it's springtime, time to breed, and there's no other coyotes around because she's the first one. But what's running around? Well, right, there's going to be some dogs. And so dogs are close relatives. They can coexist. And so we have some evidence that she then bred with these dogs. So basically, when you think about the hybridization between coyotes, dogs, and wolves, I like to call it Canis soupus, right? Canis is the genus of all three of them, and soupus, well, soup. It basically comes down to the fact that they'll breed with each other when they don't have any better options, which I found a funny Valentine to represent. So we had this coyote that was mostly coyote, but had a little bit of wolf, hybridized with the dog. That first animal would have been 50-50, right? Well, 50% dog, and then whatever, 40-some% coyote, and then a little bit of wolf. But then more coyotes showed up, and they crossed back into the coyote group. And then, so this is a modern animal from the Northeast, from upstate New York, that we genotyped. And you can see this is complicated, right? It's mostly coyote, but it's got a little bit of wolf and about equal amounts of dog from that second hybridization event. So again, these animals, and we've done a bunch of different animals, and they, it's plus or minus. I sort of say, it's sort of 5 to 10% wolf, 5 to 10% dog, and the rest coyote. So they're still mostly coyote. But what's interesting, and most of them look like coyotes. It's like the wild type generic coyote, but there are some oddballs that show up, right? We get black animals, like this beautiful animal. And this is basically just, as you're shuffling these genes, and the 5% of, it's probably the dog genes, happen to be the ones that get expressed, you get animals like this. This guy looks like a piebald dog almost. Here's a crazy animal with a white tail tip. I've only seen this once. I have no idea why, but perhaps it's from the dogs. I love this one because this shows you the difference, right? Here's obviously this animal in the front looks like a German Shepherd, but look in the background, you can see it's running with a pack mate that just generic coyote, and quite, blends in quite a bit better. So this is an article I wrote on this topic in an online magazine called The Conversation. So if you're interested in this topic more, check it out. But basically, my conclusion is, yes, coyotes are hybrids, but it's not a coy wolf. There was a documentary, Hollywood loves the term coy wolf. They throw it around all the time. Journalists throw it around sometimes. I don't like the term at all because it's mostly coyote and it's got as much dog as wolf. So it's coy wolf dog or something like that. I don't know. Let's just call it the Eastern coyote because I think that's a better name. So yes, there's some hybridization going on. But the other important thing is it's not like it's its own species, right? There's continual variation. There's continual gene flow. And so it's not like you can say, oh, the Eastern coyote is its own species and it's not breeding with the Western coyote or the other coyotes. In fact, if you look at the spread, so this is a map we made showing, this is the same map I showed you before, but animated, right? Showing you their spread in all directions. And if you look at the genetic data, there's basically 3 groupings, and they're subtle, right? There's the Northeast group that's got a little more wolf. There's the Southeast group that also has some dog, has a lot less wolf. And then there's the more typical Western animals. I will say, what's going on in Panama, we have no idea. I'm still trying to get some tissue samples up to study that because I think there's an interesting story there. But for now, the point is we've got continual gene flow between there. So they're a little bit different, but they're pretty similar. And these animals are still moving, right? Coyotes can move a long distance. They're still mixing up. Okay, so that's a little background on where the coyotes that are running around Central Park right now came from. But let's talk a little bit about what they actually are and how they're different or similar from Western coyotes, okay? They're larger. They're a little bit larger. They're about 10 pounds larger. So here's a graph from a paper that shows you the average weight of male coyotes. Males are usually a little bigger than females, from the Western United States, from the Southeast, and from the Northeast. And so you can see they're all pretty similar, but they're a little bit bigger. And it's in kilograms. And if you don't like kilograms, I've got a little translation. And this is kind of what I generally refer as, okay, Western animals averaging 25 pounds, Eastern animals averaging 35 pounds. The biggest animals are 50 pounds. So this is the biggest animals. And anyone who has a dog, I have a dog who weighs almost exactly 50 pounds. And he looks the same size as coyotes to me. But coyotes, they look big, they're not that heavy. When you get them on a scale, you realize they're actually not that heavy. And I've had arguments with people sometimes, and whatever, I don't know, put it on a scale. Let's let the scale show the truth. So the maximum that we've been able to put on a scale are right around 50 pounds, and they're pretty rare. Every once in a while they'll show up. But what we can find is that this gray wolf DNA is helping the eastern coyotes get big. So we've done some research into which genes. So we know they've hybridized. We know the eastern coyote has some genes from wolves. So what are those genes? And what are the genes that are still there in the coyotes versus the genes that may have kind of gone away, right? So if they're still there, maybe they're helping the coyote survive. And if they've gone away, they would have been hurting the coyote from survive. And what we find, a little bit of jargon here, but basically we've got these 4 different genes that we know have something to do with body size and skeletal growth, especially on chromosome 4, that we're seeing in eastern coyotes more than you would expect if everything was random. So it really seems like there's these genes, which are listed here. I'm not going to read them off, but the idea is it really seems like these genes that came over from this hybridization with wolf are helping the coyotes get larger, and that's helping them survive better. It's help the ones from the north. Remember, they colonize 5 times faster. So this is really cool. It's really a pretty amazing evolutionary story. So grossly oversimplifying their diet, my general perception is that coyotes, east and west, they like rabbits. Everything likes rabbits, right? In the east, they eat more deer, and in the west, they eat more mice, right? So that's probably part of the large coyote helping them eat more deer. Now, they're not very good hunters of deer. They're doing a lot of scavenging. There's certainly no shortage of deer. They can certainly kill fawns. They can certainly kill adult deer, but they tend to do better with ones that are injured or sick. A little bit of local data showing you also how variable it can be, right? So from Westchester County, 60% of the diet was deer, whereas in the New York City proper, in some of the boroughs, it was only 9% because there's fewer deer there, right? But there's tons of deer in Westchester County. So whatever, they're good at taking whatever you give them, whatever becomes available. Interestingly, I'm trying to remember the details. The Westchester ones had something like 2 or 3 or 4% anthropogenic food, and the New York City had maybe 10 or 12%. But those might be underestimates because sometimes, if a coyote eats a hamburger, you might not see that in their scat, which is how these studies were done. I also found it interesting that the Westchester coyotes, at least 2 or 3 of them had eaten a skunk, which I hadn't seen that before. So maybe they're getting particularly hungry. I'm not sure. Anyway, the other thing about eastern coyotes is they're definitely using forests. Western coyotes, they like the open country. Eastern coyotes, they like the open country too, but they're using forests. They're not avoiding forests. And the other thing is the same east and west. They're not usually moving in packs. So here's a picture of 4 coyotes moving together. I love it because it's one of the only pictures I've got of a group of coyotes. And if you look at all the camera trap pictures that we've got in North Carolina, which you can see of coyotes are in the thousands, the number of times it's a single coyote is overwhelming majority. And if you guys are lucky enough to get a snowfall and you can go out and snow track coyotes and follow their tracks, you'll see usually it's 1, occasionally it's 2, very rarely more than that. So they're not, hunting in cooperative packs the way wolves do, even though you think they should. If they want to do better with deer, you think they would. But so far, we're not seeing that. Right, so a little overview. The coyote is mostly coyote, the eastern coyote with a dash of dog and wolf genes. On average, they're about 35 pounds. They're definitely a generalist. eating whatever is kind of most available. Habitat, also a generalist, but using forest and suburbia. And mostly, they're pack living, so they have their family unit, but they're mostly out moving around hunting by themselves, right? Because if they kill a rabbit, they don't want to share it. If they kill a mouse, they don't want to share it, right? They want to eat that whole thing themselves. And mostly they're eating smaller prey. So the amazing thing about this story is that, right, this is evolution and natural selection. This is happening right in front of us. And, it's amazing if you follow the developments of what we know about ourselves, about humans from genomics. We're finding that we are also 3 species hybrids, right? We have a small amount, depending where your ancestry is, a small amount of Neanderthal, and some of us also a small amount of Denisovan, which is a species of sort of early human we didn't even know about before genomics. So I think it's interesting that the parallels between humans and coyotes and how adaptable we are and how genetically sort of fluid we are and how we've colonized way beyond our initial habitat. And nowadays, how we're also have some of the favorite habitats when we talk about urban areas. So I want to transition now and talk a little bit about coyotes in urban areas. And you think about, a place like this looks like a terrible habitat for an animal, a predator like a coyote. But in fact, some animals do quite well. Look at this deer with 3 fawns and all the food around it in this yard. And so there's a lot of wildlife that do quite well in natural areas or in urbanized areas, not super, super urban. But, when you're as flexible as a coyote to eat so many different things, they can do quite well. And so what I want to talk about is a little bit is obviously coyotes are here. So I want to talk a little bit about what's their value to us as those living alongside of them, and what are the problems that we as humans experience coexisting with coyotes. And a lot of this has to do with pets. Here you can see a pretty dramatic camera trap picture from Colorado, actually, of a coyote and a cat face to face. Cat's probably going to lose this battle, right? Free ranging cats, I'm not a big fan of them anyway, but I hate that someone's pet cat would get killed by a coyote. This is a picture we got from here in Raleigh in 2019. Pretty dramatic. The coyote just walked right by this cat in his mouth. But coyotes are opportunistic feeders, and so if you have situations where cats are being fed in colonies, I have run camera traps on cat colonies, and the coyotes are quite happy to eat the cat food. And then if a cat shows up, quite happy to eat the cat. And so that is a source of conflict with people who are keeping outside cats. But we've also had some problems with dogs. Here's an example from New Jersey where a dog was killed by a coyote. And I have a news alert that I get every day, an email that, when coyotes make the news, which is every day. And there's a remarkable number of videos from all these sort of backyard security cameras that people are using these days of coyote-dog conflicts. And there's some data, this is a bit of an older paper, but they surveyed the Canadian news and found that most of these attacks on dogs were small dogs, and that any of the large dogs that were attacked had chased the coyotes in the first place, right? They were off leash and they had chased the coyotes and then they got into a fight. Most of these dogs were unleashed. But if you think about it, that means 8% of the dogs were actually taken by a coyote or attacked by a coyote while it was on a leash, which is in some ways even more terrifying. And a lot of these small dogs were attacked in the yard. So most of these were in the Western Canada in this particular study. So attacks on dogs in the East are rare. They're rare, but they do happen. Interestingly, there's, people are starting to take notice, and you can buy these things, which I've known about, and I think they're awesome. I think they're hilarious, right? I mean, this dog looks hilarious. Dog doesn't look very happy, but whatever. When you're a little dog, anything that can make you look tougher, give you a little personality. I don't know. I'm curious if any of you have one of these on your dog. I'd be curious to hear what you think about it. But I recently just found the first example where this actually protected a dog that this dog, this is from Ohio from last year, and or sorry, from 2019. The coyote grabbed her and then let her go because it hurt, I guess, or freaked the coyote out. So this can seem to make a difference. But importantly, not all coyote dog interactions are aggressive. There was this great paper by Aaron Boydston and colleagues who reviewed, they just watched coyote dog interactions on YouTube and they classified them and said, what are they, and they said most of these are not predatory. Most of these, like these two guys, I think this is up in Canada, were social. And so it's interesting that, and most of the predatory interactions were with smaller dogs. Coyotes do attack people sometimes. Again, another literature review, again, a little bit old, but it shows some attacks. Most of these were in the Western United States. Some of them are rabies related, but many were not. There are one or maybe two people who have been killed by coyotes, but most of them were minor bites or no injuries at all. And to put this in perspective, 1,000 Americans go to hospital for dog bites every single day. And dogs killed 88 people in 2009. So obviously we don't want anyone to get bit by a coyote and anyone to get, especially killed by a coyote, but the risk is relatively low. And in this study, they found that quite a bit of these were related to people feeding coyotes nearby. They estimated 30%, but of course, how many of them was someone feeding the coyote and they just didn't even know that, right? And so this seems to be a problem where you don't want coyotes coming close to people looking for food, because if a kid walks by or a dog or a cat walks by, they're going to see food and go for it. And the other thing is that it seems like attacks from the non-rabid, like if an animal's rabid, like that happens, that's this baseline that we have to deal with, and generally there's not a whole lot you can do about it. But the non-rabid coyotes seem to have some warning signs beforehand. And it has happened, locally. This is an article from Rutgers University. I think a valid question is, are coyote attacks on people increasing? And I don't have a quantitative analysis of this. I haven't done a systematic review. I just kind of follow the news, but I've noted some pretty, honestly, pretty dramatic. Like, I think, yes, I think they are. I would estimate on average, Los Angeles area probably has 6 a year. Montreal had a rush of attacks in 2018. There was a situation in Frisco, Texas, where 6 different joggers were attacked in 2019 before it would seem to be the same coyote. And then just recently in Moraga, California, which is just east of the Bay Area, there were 5 attacks by apparently the same coyote. So some of these might be just kind of oddball individuals that get very aggressive, but it kind of highlights that this is ongoing. And it's something that's, honestly, I love coyotes, but I also don't want to get attacked by a coyote. So it's something to think about. So to kind of summarize this part and kind of get towards a wrap up here, I didn't talk much about livestock, but coyotes can kill sheep sometimes. Cats and dogs are a challenge, are a source of conflict. There are some attacks on people, but they're very rare. And in general, this conflict seems to be more common out west, where coyotes have lived longer and seem to be a little bit more urbanized. So what can we do about it, right? Can we manage the population? Can we have fewer coyotes? Or can we manage the behavior? And to summarize what could be a whole nother talk, basically coyote removal doesn't reduce local population size, right? And it goes against your intuitions, which is like, well, let's just shoot them all, right? But the problem is, some reporter once told me, I don't know where they'd heard this term. I didn't coin the term, but I like the term coyote math, where you take away 1 and you get 4, right? And the basic idea, we think, is, we don't totally understand this. If you remove a territorial animal, you've got all these floater animals, these teenage animals that want a territory, and they all rush in and try to establish themselves. And eventually, you'll get some equilibrium, right? A pair will establish themselves as the dominants, and they'll keep the other ones out. But if you have this constant social chaos, where you're constantly removing territorial animals, you have all these floaters coming in. And one recent study from Georgia estimated that 40% of the population of coyotes were floaters. That's a lot, right? That means there's always a bunch of animals, and there's some amazing tracking data showing them, skirting around the outside of a territory to avoid the dominance, because they get their butts kicked if they run into the dominant. So, basically, unless you're ready to get a helicopter and aerial gun the coyotes like crazy and spend a ton of money, you're just not going to reduce the population size of coyotes. So what about the behavior? Can we change the behavior? And so now I'm coming back to what I started with, the fact that coyotes are a mesopredator, right? So look at this picture of this coyote nonchalantly hanging out by an elk kill while there's a wolf chasing at him. This is what mesopredators can do. They're very good at evaluating risk and deciding, when can I get some food and when am I at risk from a larger predator? Because I'm not the big predator, I'm the mesopredator, I'm the medium-sized predator. And so I think, they're evolutionarily tuned to do this. So they must see humans in the same way. And so they should be able to evaluate, am I at risk from this person or in this scenario, or should I run in and grab a mouthful of food? And so we have groups, there are groups like the Project Coyote that want to change behavior without violence. And this would be great if it worked. So far, it doesn't seem to work very well. And they say, make a lot of noise, scare the coyote away, make them think that you're dangerous. I just think coyotes are too smart, right? Here's the news clip. This guy's like, go out and bang some pots and pans. Like, how many times is a coyote going to hear pots and pans banging together before they realize that's not a threat and I'm going to run in and grab my little bite to eat anyway? So I think that we have to, that there does need to be some kind of behavioral change. I think we really need to be focusing on changing the animal's behavior, because their abundance we can't do. And so, some places like Montreal are doing a more comprehensive hazing program. I haven't been able to learn the details. I'm not sure exactly how they're doing it, but in Alberta, they're doing it with paintball guns and dogs, which some people have said is a bad idea. And I won't get into the details of it, but it'll be interesting to see, how this works out of, do you need to kill them? Do you need to trap them and let them go? Do you need to hit them with paintball guns? But, if coyotes get bolder and bolder, how do we manage their behavior in an urban environment, right? Where we can't go shooting coyotes in Central Park. We can't go setting foothold traps all over Central Park. So it still is really, I think a challenge. And so, living with coyotes, number one, don't feed them, right? That's like the worst thing. That's going to get them to habituate to people, to look for food near people more often. It's a recipe for disaster. So that's the most important thing. I think some hunting and trapping is important to modify their behavior and to remove particular problem animals, right? That one coyote in Frisco that attacked 6 joggers, once they trapped him, no more joggers got attacked. We should be doing that. That's okay, right? How to keep urban coyotes shy, I think is still a challenge. I think is an area that we need to work on more. But I think it's also important to remember, right, the good side of predators. They're what maintains the balance of nature. I wish we had more coyotes in my neighborhood, because there's so many geese around. There's goose poop everywhere. My dog eats it all the time. I'm stepping in it all the time. Who knows what bacteria is in there? You could say the same thing about a variety of different prey, right? We need the balance of nature, even in urban areas, maybe more than anything in urban areas. And coyotes can help deliver that. So I'll just kind of end with a couple fun photographs, just speculating how urban can they get. And here's some pictures of some bold animals exploring new habitat. This one in Georgia ran through a cat door and ended up on someone's kitchen. This one in Nashville literally crashed a concert and ended up in the bathroom. This famous one in Chicago in a sandwich shop and then tried to hide in the drink cooler. And then you might know this one from New York that somehow ended up on the rooftop. And you can imagine, what if coyotes figure out how to colonize rooftops and jump from rooftop to rooftop and hunt roof rats or other kinds of it could be a whole ecosystem up there. And then finally, this guy who made it on the airport train in Portland, Oregon. And you can just imagine, if they ever figure out how to board airplanes, there might be no end to how far they will go. So that's the end of my talk, and I think we've got time for questions, so looking forward to that part. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kays. Hi, everybody. This is Gabriel Willow. I'm the Vice President of the Lennan Society of New York. That was really fascinating. Thank you. Yeah, I've also been lucky enough to have some really awesome coyote encounters in New York City. I think only in the Bronx. I haven't seen a Manhattan coyote yet, or in my home borough of Brooklyn. I don't know if we have them here. But I've had some really...
I still haven't seen one in Raleigh. I've lived in Raleigh now for like 8 years, and I've seen like one or two on the highway driving around. And I spend a good amount of time in the woods. They're generally very, very shy and very just, you know, they don't want to have anything to do with us for the most part.
Yeah, no, I feel very privileged and lucky to get to see them. And it was during the day, and one was at the New York Botanical Garden, and it just sort of trotted by over a path. I was with a group. It was 11 in the morning on a sunny day, and it stopped, looked at us, and just kind of kept going about its business. And the other one was also in the Bronx at a place called Wave Hill. It was interesting at the time, neither place really wanted me to mention it. Like I got some photographs I could have shared on social media, and they're like, nah, maybe don't, I don't know if I should say that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's true, right? That coyotes, well, I don't know. I'm curious how this group feels, but I feel like I've seen some survey results that kind of say this, that basically 20% of people really like them, 20% of people really don't like them, and there's a lot of people you know really don't like them, and then everyone else is somewhere in the middle where they kind of don't have much of an opinion.
Anecdotally, it does seem like attitudes have changed a bit. Actually, maybe you would know. This is a question from me. I do have some questions here, and just for everybody listening, hop into the Q&A and ask some questions. We have maybe 8 or 10 questions right now, but we could have a few more. So I'm going to just ask a couple of my own questions, and then to buy a little time, and then everybody else go in there in the Q&A and type in some questions, and I'll pass them on to Dr. Kays. Do you happen to know if, anecdotally, it seems to me that New York's policy, whether it's parks or the city somewhere, may have shifted? Because I recall a few years ago when there was coyotes in the news in Central Park, they pretty quickly got tranquilized and relocated. And there's been a pretty widely known coyote recently just hanging out in the park, and I don't hear anybody saying they're going to go tranquilize it. So has there been a shift in official or unofficial policy around that?
So do you know? My understanding is that first movement was actually illegal, because if you I haven't lived in New York State for a while, but when I used to live up in Albany, the rule was if you move wildlife, you can't release a nuisance wildlife, right? So you're not allowed to take a raccoon that's a problem for you and go release it someplace else. You're supposed to kill it. That's what the rule is. Of course, people don't do that, but that's the rule, and it's a sensible rule. And so that one of the first, high-profile New York City coyote, one of the first ones that showed up in Central Park, got captured. Technically, they were not allowed to release that animal, but somehow, I don't know if it got a pardon from the governor or what exactly the deal was, but because it was so high profile, I think that guy's name was Howl. Is that right? Was that the first one named Howl? Anyway, I think they may have kind of done that, and after, the first one, they're like, oh my God, coyotes shouldn't be here. We should just get them out of here, and then we won't have them anymore. Well, then they kept coming back, and eventually I think they realized that they're here to stay, and so they've kind of given up on that.
Well, maybe some of that is partly in thanks to research like yours that demystifies them a bit and makes people less fearful and understands that they're potentially a useful, or at least just a part of the ecosystem.
Yeah,
they don't have to have a value, I guess.
Right. Central Park's just another ecosystem, and it was out of balance without predators for a while, and it'd be interesting to know if the ecosystem changes now that coyotes are there.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you said though about how you weren't allowed to subsequently release a problem animal or pest animal, because I do remember there was a couple coyotes in Central Park, and one of them was supposedly relocated. One was tranquilized, but then subsequently died. And I thought it was because maybe they used the wrong amount of tranquilizer, but maybe they just didn't quite want to say, but they actually.
Well, I mean, there's some stress in moving animals around and keeping them in cages and stuff like that. I think the one that died was just really stressed by, because I think if I remember right, that one got moved and like sat overnight someplace for a couple nights, or
Right.
it took a while because it was uncharted territory. There were clear rules, and they were breaking them, and so so I think that's part of why it maybe wasn't handled. Maybe didn't go as smooth as it might have.
It was very.
I don't think I don't think that was a drug overdose.
Gotcha. That's what I wondered. I don't want to ask any questions that are going to get anybody in trouble. So we might have some parks folks here watching. So I'll move on. There is another question here about Central Park, the Central Park coyote. Someone heard rumors that the coyote in Central Park might have pups. Do you know if that's the case?
I am not that dialed into Central Park coyote seasonal information. So maybe somebody else can chime in on that. I don't know.
Okay. I also have no idea. Here's a nice general question. What is their relation? I don't know if this means relation. It says relation genetically or socially. What is their relation to foxes?
Okay, sure. Well, I answer both. So they're kind of like the big mean cousin. So they're obviously they're in the canids, right? They're both canids, right? So they're in the canid family. But they're pretty distantly related. So they have a different genus, and there's no way they would be able to hybridize. Generally, if mammals are in a different genus, they're not able to hybridize between them. And what's interesting is if you think about the carnivores, right? They kind of beat up on each other. And there was a really interesting study recently that showed that the canids are much meaner to each other than any of the other groups are to each other, or that canids are to anyone else. And so they compared, I think it was just North America. So they compared the bears, the cats, including bobcats and mountain lions, and the canids, the coyotes, the wolves, and the foxes. And they found that the canids really go out of their way, the bigger ones, to beat up on the smaller ones. So the wolves beat up on the coyotes beat up on the foxes, and that those rates were higher than like mountain lions on bobcats, or mountain lions on coyotes, or bears on coyotes, or any of the other mixes. So it does seem like there's quite a bit of sort of antagonism between them, and it's why the canids are meaner to each other than the other ones. I don't know, and I think there's still a lot we have to learn about how coyotes moving into New York City or some other urban area where clearly, as we've just been talking about, they're becoming more common and covering more areas. What impact will they have on the foxes? And we've been doing some work in Raleigh, and one of the interesting things we find is that where there's tree cover and coyotes, the gray foxes do quite well. But if there's tree cover, if there's coyotes and not enough tree cover, the gray foxes do worse. And we think, gray foxes, some people call them the cat-like canid because they're able to climb trees, right? They've got the claws that can come out, and they're actually one of the only canids that's pretty good at climbing trees. And so we actually think that might be part of it, where if you maintain enough forest, enough tree cover, and that the gray foxes can get away from the coyotes if they actually have an encounter. And I've actually been thinking, I wonder if there's another dimension that we haven't got at yet, where it depends on the type of trees, right? If you have like the big tree trunks that just go straight up and then branch out, 50 feet up, gray fox can't climb that. But if you have a more complex canopy that they could get up there, so that might be something fun to look at in the future.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm always surprised that we don't have more. I mean, I don't think we have gray foxes at all around here, but I've seen red foxes not that far from the city in Westchester and in like Jones Beach. I've seen red fox more than once, which is, not very far at all in Nassau County. But I rarely hear about red foxes within the 5 boroughs, and that surprises me because they're very adaptable and they're urban in some areas. Like there's a lot of stories in the news about them moving into London, for example. I'm surprised we don't have more of a fox presence here, but maybe the coyotes have something to do with that. Yeah, I don't know. We have a couple of coyote vocalization questions. One is, why do coyotes howl? And then the other question, where was it? Well, I think it was something along those lines. Now I can't. Oh, here we go. Well, just can you talk about the sounds, barks, howls, and how they're communicating?
Yeah. So coyotes have a very yippy howl. It's higher pitched than sort of your classic wolf howl. But they do it socially often, and they come together and sort of all howl together. But again, it's very yippy, higher pitched. Again, sometimes we don't have full understanding, but I think the primary purpose of that is to advertise their pack's territory and to say, we are a big pack here, and so all you floaters stay out of here because we're here, right? And so if you had an area that doesn't have howling, maybe the pack would be more likely, maybe a floater would be more likely to go in there. But if a floater's walking around and he hears a bunch of howling off to the side, he's going to go the other way because that'll be dangerous. So that seems to be the primary purpose. I'm curious if anyone's heard howling in New York City, because it seems like I only ever hear howling when I'm in a more wild area. And so I'm kind of wondering if urban coyotes have given up howling for some reason, and if so, like how that affects their social system. Have you heard them, Gabriel?
I was going to say, no, I never have. I did see someone post on Twitter, actually, they posted a video, and they were within, I think, the city limits of Atlanta, but that's a much more spread out sort of city, I guess. But there was a pack howling that they recorded, and I believe they're in Atlanta, maybe in a more suburban zone. I don't think I've ever heard one howling it within the city. I guess if anybody has, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Even if it's not a question, you can put comments too, I believe. The Zoom doesn't know that, yes, if anybody's heard.
There was one interesting study where they asked people, how many coyotes do you think are howling in this recording? And they knew how many, they knew. And people always overestimated. If it's one coyote, you can usually tell it's one. But once it's more than one, people are always overestimating. So whenever you hear the coyotes and you think, oh my God, there must be 15 of them, it's probably, divide by 5 or something.
Oh, that's really cool. I know. I've always thought that. I'm like, wow, there's like 20 coyotes out there. That's wild. Huh. Okay, that's really interesting. So they're kind of ventriloquists almost, huh? They're able to.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if you're trying to impress your enemy, you're a big tough pack. You want to howl in a way that makes it sound like there's even more of you.
That's so cool. Well, that's a really fun fact. I like that. Well, there's a fun question here. How do coyotes cross roads safely? And actually, I would ask a related question. This is my question. How are these coyotes getting onto the island of Manhattan, do you imagine?
Yeah, good questions. Often coyotes don't cross roads safely. And I don't think there's any mystery about that, right? They get hit by cars. They do see, I think that's got to be one of the strongest aspects of natural selection that's going on with urban coyotes is they learn how to cross a road, right? They learn how to look both ways. Maybe their mom teaches them, who knows exactly how it's happening, but that's got to be one of the greatest natural selection factors. We did some work. Obviously, there's some underpasses, right? And so, if there's a river area, they'll run along it. We did some work monitoring underpasses that were, kind of drainage culverts, like smaller tubes. And we got lots of fisher running through there, but the coyotes didn't. It was sort of too small, too crammed for them. Fishers are weasels. Weasels love tubes. And so they're just like, yeah, go for it. And the coyotes, sometimes you would even see them come down and sniff and then go over the top and just take the risk. So that's my impression on roads, is that it's a challenge. But we had a coyote once up in Albany have like a 1 square kilometer home range for a year. It's a really small area, right? So they can just sit tight. They can just hang out, and if they can find food, they don't need to move as much. In terms of getting from island to island, whether it's bridge or swimming or over on the ice. I remember once a traffic copter video of a coyote, was it on Rockaway Bay or something like that was like jumping from like ice float to ice float. So we don't know exactly. I don't know exactly how to do it. Maybe someone else knows, but it's probably a little bit of everything, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah. That reminds me of another coyote sighting I had up at Croton Point Park, trotting around on the ice. one winter. So that's another place I've seen them. Someone, in terms of the howling coyote question, someone says they have howling coyotes in Princeton, New Jersey. So that's pretty close to the city. And that they also regularly see red fox on their property, and have seen one gray fox in 30 years. So not many there.
Well, we know that what we found with our red fox, gray fox stuff is the more urbanized, the better it is for the red fox. I think, especially the big cities. So we have a study of Raleigh and DC and Washington, DC, not that far apart. Tons of red fox in Washington, DC. Raleigh has more gray fox. We have red fox too, but almost no gray fox in DC. So I think it's like the big megatropolises are somehow better for red foxes. You mentioned the red foxes in London, which are pretty famous. And I think the European scene is a little bit different. I think people feed the foxes more than we do over here, which is probably not a good thing. But still, the red foxes seem to do really well close to people. And the gray foxes, they do okay. They're in my backyard all the time, but not to the same level of the megatropolis the way that the red foxes do.
Very cool. And maybe some of you heard a siren going by. I quickly muted myself, but it's funny because someone just commented, in Sterling Forest, a siren sounds at noon. Sterling Forest is upstate, and sets off the coyotes howling. So that's sort of funny that a siren they respond to.
Oh, yeah.
And
well, that's actually a survey technique some people will use, is they'll go out into the woods and play a siren and try to get the coyotes to howl back to see where they are and how many there are there. But again, I'm not surprised. Sterling Forest, that's a pretty big forest, but in the urban areas.
Yeah, and the same person mentioned that gray foxes are fairly common, actually, and increasing in Westchester County and in northern New Jersey, and red foxes apparently have a problem competing with them, he says. So, well, I haven't seen a gray fox in many years. I would love to see a local gray fox.
Well, that could be the difference that the coyote makes. Calculating here, right? But if gray foxes are better at avoiding coyotes than red foxes because they can climb trees, then when coyotes move in, they might shift the balance between the two of them, and the red fox would be persecuted more by the coyotes, and the gray foxes, if there's trees around, would be able to climb up.
Now we have a couple of hybridization questions about the whole coy wolf dog thing. Canis soupus, as he called it. I like that. One is there any study indicating that they're still actively hybridizing? And the other somewhat related question, when you say hybridization event, do you mean one historic individual? Are all eastern coyotes descended from like one coyote-wolf pair and then a second coyote-dog pair, or is it an ongoing process?
Yeah. Well, good questions. The first question is, we don't see any evidence in today of ongoing hybridization, right? So it would be obvious because it would be an F1 hybrid that would be 50%, or something like that. It would be like really high percentage. And we sampled hundreds of animals and we haven't seen that. So not that it couldn't happen, but again, from judging from the pattern, it seems like it happens when one animal is really rare and the other animal is really common. And now coyotes are really common kind of all over the place, right? And so they don't need, why would they breed with a dog? They don't need to. There's plenty of coyotes around that they would rather breed with. And so that seems to be the situation, where the red wolf in North Carolina is a lot more rare. They do hybridize with dogs sometimes, or with coyotes sometimes. I don't think dogs, I think, I'm also kind of interested. It seems like there's fewer free-ranging, fertile dogs running around now than there might have been 100 years ago in the landscape. So I think that might change that as well. The other question.
That makes sense.
What was the other question?
That was basically it. They were related. It was just sort of, was it one and historic?
Oh well, yeah. So how many times did it happen initially? Right.
Yeah.
So it seems like. So this was the interesting thing when we first did this work. We just used mitochondrial DNA, and so our bodies have mitochondrial and nuclear DNA, and mitochondria is only passed on from the mother. And when we first did this, we got no dog DNA in all of our samples, like 700 coyote samples, no dog DNA. Okay, dogs aren't hybridizing. And then we did the nuclear DNA, and we got all kinds of dog DNA. So it turns out it's male dogs and female coyotes.
Huh.
So the females are always passing on their coyote DNA, and it's always the dogs that are passing on the male DNA, which we didn't get until we added that part. But the way that relates to this question is, I believe we had at least 3 or 4 different mitochondrial types, which means at a minimum, it was 3 or 4 different female coyotes that were bred with by dogs, right? So it could have been more, could have been less, or no, couldn't have been less. But so I think it probably happened a handful of times, and probably with the genetic tools we have now, we can get a lot more resolution. Someone could probably figure that out, but I don't think anyone's tried yet.
That's really interesting. Okay, so just to recap your answer, it was male domestic dogs with a female coyote. I wonder if that's because the male coyote being bigger would have been more aggressive, and it just would have been a dangerous match if it was the other way around. That's interesting.
I think it's female choice.
Oh, okay. Now, but then you had those amazing photos of like the brindle coyote and the black coyote and the coyote that looks sort of like a Rottweiler with the coloring, the brown and black. So all those variations, are those accounted for from the genes of those dogs? Who knows when? 100? What's the time frame we're thinking here? A couple hundred years ago?
No, well, the dog hybridization was like 50 years. And so it matches up with the timing of when they crossed the St. Lawrence Seaway. Or something, right? So it didn't need to literally be that. But imagine, the first coyote that entered Albany County or whatever county, sort of that initial wave, that's when the dog hybridization came to. And we haven't done, so the coat color genetics are fairly well worked out for dogs, actually. And so there's been some research. Actually, the amazing story is that the gene for black wolves or black coyotes is originally from a dog. But it's now widespread in wolves across North America, but not in Europe. And what they figured out was when the first humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge 10 to 12,000 years ago with dogs, those dogs had the black coat color gene, and those dogs hybridized with wolves, and that gene moved into the wolf population. So this hybridization isn't just a new thing. It's been going on.
Right.
Who knows? We know it happened then. Who knows how many different times these little bits of genes have crossed over? But that black gene turned out to be really beneficial. And so you have animals, for example, in British Columbia in the dark rainforest that live in dark habitats. Those wolves are almost all black. And they can tell from some detailed genetic studies that gene was originally from a dog, and that like 10,000 years ago crossed into the wolves and now has spread around.
That's so cool. I just assumed, you see so many pictures of them. I feel like they're very dramatic. They wind up in National Geographic or whatever frequently. And I just assumed, I don't know, that it was like a black panther, which is actually usually a leopard or jaguar, just a naturally occurring melanistic population. That's really interesting. Wow.
Yeah, they're not, and it's interesting. They're like, if you go up to the tundra, they're all white, right? You don't want a black wolf when you're hunting muskox up in the tundra. And then as you get basically further south, they get more common to be dark. So Yellowstone's like 50-50.
Wow, that's so cool. Now, of course, we have a few questions about the attack aspect. One is about in regards to that. I suspect it's referencing that hunt, the circular hunt from 1812 or whenever that was. During earlier times, wouldn't wildlife be killed to protect the pioneers themselves as well as their livestock?
Sure. Yes. That's true, but you don't really need to clear a forest to protect yourself. And there's another interesting angle to this with the wolves, which is that Europeans came to North America very, very afraid of wolves because wolves in Europe killed people. And you look at the mythology, Little Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, right? It was the big evil, it was the big bad wolf. And you can look at records of Dutch settlements and small towns in France that just got devastated by wolves. It was a real problem. Somehow it was totally different in North America. Same species, but look at the mythology of wolves in Native American clans, Native American tribes. They're like the wolf clan is this, honorable character that they seek to emulate. And in fact, there are very, very few verified records of wolves killing people in North America. There's been a couple here and there, but many fewer than are verified in Europe. And so so I kind of went off on a tangent here, but certainly European colonists were terrified of wolves, but they probably didn't have to be.
That's really interesting. That's actually fascinating. It's a wonderful tangent, because I've sort of wondered about that myself. I just tended to chalk it up to differences in European cultural attitudes towards nature in general, and ideas of like manifest destiny or something versus Native American attitudes. But it's interesting that there may have been a behavioral underpinning in the wolves themselves that led to that. Wow. And actually, along those lines, it's a little macabre topic here, but two different people brought up Taylor Mitchell, the young woman who was, I believe, a jogger, if I'm not mistaken, killed in 2009 in Cape Breton in Canada. And they both just ask if you are aware of this event. I'm sure you are, and just what you know about it, and that was pretty unusual, I guess, right?
It was. It's the only adult that's been killed, and I think she was a hiker, not a jogger, but yeah, she was off by herself in the wilderness. Yeah. And I remember when this happened, because some of us that study coyotes kind of got on the phone and were like, oh my God, and can you believe it? And because everyone thought, when this eventually happens, it's going to be in an urban area where the coyotes are getting bolder and bolder and bolder, and they're showing up at schoolyards, and they're attacking pets, and they're attacking dogs, and then they're maybe threatening people, and then they're going to kill somebody, right? And then it happened in Nova Scotia in the middle of a national park. Like, it was kind of bizarre, and just unexpected, right? And so, I think part of that is just random nature, random stuff, happen there. It's not there might be something to that local population of coyotes being a bit more aggressive towards people. I've seen other news articles of them kind of attacking people on farms and stuff like that. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on up there. I know some people have some research projects. I'm not involved in it, but it wasn't necessary. If you follow the news locally, it wasn't necessarily a completely isolated event. To me, it came out of the blue, but there might be something about the coyotes up there that has led to them being a bit more aggressive. And she was, also she was a smaller person. I don't know if that may have played into it at some point. They're much more likely to attack kids or small people than smaller, than bigger people.
Maybe those Nova Scotia wolves somehow got some European wolf genes in them, and
European wolves, because they would actually
yeah. And along those lines, following up on that, someone else asked about ways to protect yourself. Is pepper spray a good way to protect yourself?
Oh yeah, that would work. I'm sure that would work great. I mean, I've never tried it, but yeah, because coyotes they're looking for an easy meal. I would say anything you can do to fight back, and pepper spray. Pepper spray works against. Pepper spray works against grizzly bears, so I'm sure it's going to work against a coyote.
Okay. And also along those lines, are dog owners allowed, I guess, legally to kill coyotes to defend their dog or cat if they witness an attack?
I would think so. I would think so. I would have to double check for sure with the DEC. But generally with any wildlife, yeah, you're allowed to defend yourself. And even if you feel like there's a threat, you can sometimes apply for a permit ahead. Obviously, if a coyote is attacking your dog, you can go save your dog and beat the coyote in the head with a stick, right? That's fine. No one's going to give you a hard time for that. But if you feel like if you feel like a coyote is, hanging around and is menacing you, and you want to do something about that, you can usually, again, I have to double check in New York City, but or in New York, usually you can sort of apply for a permit, and they're pretty much, we'll give you permission to take action to safeguard your family and your animals.
Yeah, but before I was born, my parents lived in New Mexico, kind of out in the desert, and they always tell an anecdote about, it's anecdotal, I don't know if it's true or not, but that they had a dog who was often outdoors, and they would once witnessed coyotes coming and sort of being very playful, like kind of like doing the thing where they, go down on their front legs, but then trotting away, and the dog sort of wanted to play and would start following them. But they thought maybe the coyotes were trying to entice the dog away, acting playful and friendly, but then we're kind of, so that's an interesting interaction they saw. I don't know what was really going on there. But.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they definitely are playful with dogs. And, whether there's an ulterior motive where they really want to lure them away and beat them up, I don't know. It does happen sometimes. So, but it seems like it quite often doesn't happen as well.
Yeah. This was like 50 years ago, and they still talk about it every time the topic of coyotes come up. I'll probably mention this talk to them in a few days, and they're going to tell me that story again.
Right.
And somebody actually mentions, this is more of a comment than another anecdote rather than a question, but they say they live in Hastings, New York, and the neighbor across the street from them was bitten by a rabid coyote that killed their Pekingese. So that's terrible.
Oh God.
So I guess rabies is a concern.
Yeah, I mean, rabies, again, I feel like that's just like the Russian roulette, right? Where just, it shows up in animals. It could be a raccoon, it could be a coyote, it could be a fisher. And it's bad. If you run into one of those, you lost the lottery. It's bad luck. And, fortunately, the treatment's not so bad anymore. But it's still not that frequent of a problem. It tends to be pretty unusual.
And it's more often than anything actually domestic cats or dogs, right?
Well, I mean,
I've heard that. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think we've got a pretty good vaccination program going in this country. In some other countries, the dog rabies is a big problem.
Speaking of, you mentioned fishers, and somebody asked if fishers and coyotes conflict, or what their relationship is like.
I think they just kind of stay out of each other's way. That's a good question. We haven't noticed anything one way or the other. I'll tell you the weird thing about fishers and other predators, it comes to do with cats, with bobcats and lynx. Because in the Western United States, there's a bunch of evidence that shows bobcats are killing fishers. And it's kind of a problem because in some parts of California, Oregon, Washington, they're trying to recover the fisher population, and the bobcats are killing them, especially the females. And lynx are bigger than bobcat. And there are now like 4 or 5 records in Maine of eastern fisher killing a lynx, which is just like crazy, right? And so it's like, I don't know if like eastern fisher are just more badass or just lynx are just more wimps, but that's my fun anecdote about fishers and cats.
Wow. Also, lynx are like, I grew up in Maine, and lynx are very rare there still, so that's a shame.
No, they're right. And so they were studying the lynx, and they're like, oh no, one of our lynx died. And they go there and they look in the snow, and it's like, oh my God, a fisher killed it. And it didn't just happen once, it was at least 3 or 4 times, because they wrote a paper about it. And we were like, oh my goodness, fishers are just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they're also, speculation on my part, I wonder now that the wolverine has mostly been eliminated from much of North America, if fishers are like becoming a bit larger to fill that niche a little bit.
Oh,
because they're both
they are a little bit bigger in the east. Actually, we've shown that they have gotten a little bit bigger. Their skull size in the eastern United States has gotten a little bit bigger. I don't know if it's wolverine or just general wolf, cougar. It's sort of all larger predators are small, so they might be. And so you have fishers in the east doing very well, covering all Pennsylvania, moving down into West Virginia, expanding into urban areas in some places, and then fishers in the western United States get beat up by bobcats. So it might be, and mountain lions and wolves. So it might be some kind of mesopredator release where, in the absence of the bigger predators, wolverines perhaps, but also wolves and cougars, that they're thriving. Very
cool. And we also used to have, I'm sure there was an extinct mustelid. We used to have sea mink around these parts, or up in the Gulf of Maine. And I'm sad that those are gone. They were like a mink mixed with a sea otter.
We don't even know what they were, really.
I guess, yeah.
There's rumors that there's a sea mink, a mounted sea mink in a bar somewhere on the Northeast. If you ever find it, you got to tell me.
So otherwise, there's no known specimens or anything?
There's like bones from shell heaps.
Ah.
Very, very little known. So it's even like, was it its own species or subspecies? I don't think we've done the DNA yet. So I think it's classified as a species, but it's kind of like, no,
very cool.
Really. We really don't know much about it.
I'm taking us off topic though. Sorry. You can always count on me to ask the discursive
yeah,
question.
Right.
There are a couple more though. One comment, someone in the know, I guess, said that the coyote that was tranquilized that subsequently died had heartworms. So maybe it was in poor health. Someone says they're a little confused. They thought that coyotes were generally loners or rarely more than two. So how do these packs end up forming?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the packs are family units around breeding. So obviously you have the mated pair, right? And once a pair becomes mated, they have this territory, and they pretty much stick to that, and they patrol it and they defend it. And then in the springtime they'll have a litter, and they're monogamous, and they help raise a litter together, right? The dad will bring food and the mom will nurse, and they'll hunt together. So then those young will grow up, and by the fall time they're starting to get to be these sort of long-legged teenagers that kind of look funny, and sometimes they're curious, sometimes they get in trouble. And as you wrap around to the next year, and that mated pair is going to have another litter. And so what happens at this point is usually most of the young of the year from the last year, most of those teenagers will disperse. But sometimes a few will hang out. And so this is where they're different from wolves, because wolves will quite regularly have young from previous years hang out for multiple years. But the coyotes, it's much less common. So it will sometimes. And so usually the pack would be, mom and dad and the kids when they're big teenagers. That's when you would have the biggest pack size. And by the time they wrap around to the next breeding season, maybe it's mom and dad and one of the young from last year that hangs around, but not usually as much. So that's the general pack structure that we have. And it's a little surprising, I think they're better killing deer if they hunted in packs more often, but we're not seeing that, so far anywhere.
Oh, that's interesting. I have been spreading misinformation then. I thought that because with wolves and dogs, well, more so the wolves, that they were hunting in packs and were taking down deer in a more collaborative fashion, the way wolves do. So that's not actually
it doesn't seem like it. It's hard. That's hard data to get, really, because they're so shy and it's so hard to see them. You can't just sit on a hilltop on the side of the road in Yellowstone with your binoculars and watch what happens. But from some studies on snow tracking, where they follow the footprints and see, okay, how many animals, what did they kill, what happened, they found no difference of pack running animals killing deer more than non-pack running animals. So it doesn't seem to be happening so far.
Wow, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to incorporate that into my coyote facts that I occasionally, tell folks.
Right.
Yeah, that's very good to know. We have a question here. I think we'll it's just about 8:30, so I think we'll just do. Well, there's only 3 questions left anyway, so I might as well. And another one just popped up. Now it's 4. Actually, this is a pretty cool question, so I'm going to ask the one that just popped up because it's related to that breeding and pack behavior. Do males or females roam further looking for new territory, and are we more likely, therefore, to have males versus females moving into Central Park?
Good question. I don't know. So once they're territorial, once they've formed a bond, the mated pair, they move the same. You can map their movements. It's exactly the same. They've got their territory, their scent marking. They're in that circle. The teenagers, the dispersers, the floaters that are out looking for territories, I don't know for sure if male or females move further. Generally with mammals, the males move further.
Yep.
But so I would guess that it would be the males, but I think the females can move fairly far as well. And that's why they spread That's why they spread east so fast, right? It wasn't just like with these mountain lions that roam out of South Dakota, like that one that showed up in Connecticut. That was a male, right? So it's like, oh, great. Well, that doesn't help. So I think unlike the mountain lions, the coyotes, I think, have a more even distribution of how far both males and females can go a long way, and so that's why they're so good at colonizing new habitats.
Yeah, it's the same with birds. Usually it's males and often like immature males or first year males who are exploring more, pushing the edges of their range and winding up in unusual places. So that makes sense. Someone wants to know if there's anything unique about coyotes on Cape Cod.
Probably have a funny accent. I don't know.
Good answer.
No, I don't know. I hear that they're maybe a little easier to see there than some other places. Maybe they've tamed up a little bit more, become a bit more habituated. There might be less hunting in that area. I know there's some records of them, hunting on the beach, probably eating some seals, but I'm sure they would do that. I mean, coyotes are going to eat whatever they can find, right? So I'm not surprised by that.
Like live seals?
Well, like little seals, or no, I think scavenging on a dead seal or something like that. No, I mean, they're right. An adult seal sees a coyote coming, they're just going to lop into the water and they'll be fine. They wouldn't be able to kill them.
And I was just corrected here. Someone writes that in birds, females disperse further than males.
Yeah, I think that's on average. So mammals and birds are often opposite in the sort of on average as to which goes, and it's thought to be that I'm going to get this right. One is more resource-based defense, and one is more mate-based defense. But I'd have to. It's been a while since I taught animal behavior, so I have to double check that.
Fair. Well, I'm glad that I was corrected on that. I think I was just speaking anecdotally. Some vagrant or out of range birds I've personally seen have been often immature males, but I guess that is not actually the case. Someone speaking of the Cape Cod coyotes, someone said there was an attack on both human and dog last year at Herring Cove outside Provincetown. So maybe they're getting a bit too bold there. And last, there's two questions here. Last two. Is there, speaking of these aggressive coyotes, I think you sort of answered this, but maybe not. Is there a genetic component to aggressiveness that may be present in some populations of coyotes?
Yeah, we don't know. That's an interesting question. Could not be, and I think it's a really interesting question, actually, because to the extent that it's genetic or learned, those are the options, right? Is it something that they learn or is it something that they inherited? You would manage the coyotes differently, right? Because if it's just something they learned, you could pick up and that would kind of, okay, that's a problem animal. Where if it's genetic, you would want to kill more animals basically to sort of try to get rid of that. And so, what's interesting is that we're getting to the point where we could potentially answer that question with some research, right? Because we're starting to be able to identify, we could identify the candidate genes. I've been working with Bridget Van Holt at Princeton University, who's really good at learning from the dog genome what we think genes do, right? So you can sort of get some candidate genes that, well, these we think are more likely for to be associated with boldness or with aggressiveness or whatever. And so you could start to look for those candidate genes. And one of the things I have tried to do is if I see a coyote was in the news for being aggressive and was killed, I call the police department and try to get a genetic sample. So I've got about a half a dozen of those so far, but I probably need more to actually do that study.
Well, that's also nice because then at least it didn't die for nothing. At least for science. That's good. Wow, that's really interesting. Actually, we have the person who corrected me on the female versus male birds being the ones more prone to vagrancy is none other than Kevin McGowan, who says to say hello and that you were
oh my God, Kevin,
a field assistant on crow research at Cornell.
Absolutely.
So Kevin's been viewing.
Oh, fantastic. Hi, Kevin.
So greetings from Kevin. I think that should just about do it. This was fascinating. And thank you, Dr. Kays, so much for being here and sharing your research.
Well, sure. Maybe you can have Kevin come on next time and talk about the relationship between crows and coyotes, because that's one I want to know about.
That sounds amazing. Yes. Dr. McGowan, we should make that happen. I can't remember if, oh yes, I was going to say, I can't quite remember if Ken's coming back on. There he is. So I will hand it off to Ken. And thank you so much, Dr. Kays.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Great.
And thank you so much, Roland. That was a really great way to wrap up our season. That's such a fascinating, interesting topic and discussion. So again, thank you, sir, for being here tonight and really delivering. I particularly found the hybridization history fascinating, and I could talk with you for another hour, but we don't have that hour. So I thank you again, and I thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I hope that everyone enjoyed this presentation and that you will all return in September when we resume our speaker meetings online. And until then, good spring birding, stay healthy, stay active, stay positive, stay 6 feet apart, and have a wonderful spring and summer. Watch for my upcoming letter and please vote. See you all in September.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.